He found the little girl just as the snow began to fall in earnest, her small form a splash of pink against the deepening white of the forest floor. He was just a single dad trying to give his daughter a quiet afternoon in nature, a man who found more solace in the whisper of pines than the chatter of the city. But when he saw the child, alone and crying, her tiny shoulders shaking with a grief too big for her frame, everything else in his world fell away. He knelt beside her, his heart lurching, and in that one moment of simple kindness, he unknowingly opened the door to a life he never could have imagined. Because, hours later, the woman who would arrive at his cabin wasn't just a frantic mother, she was a reclusive billionaire, the architect of a tech empire. A woman who had spent years building walls around her heart, never realizing that a humble park ranger and a lost child held the key to tearing them all down. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The air in the high country had a bite to it, a clean, sharp cold that promised more snow and made the silence feel ancient. Liam Brooks pulled the worn collar of his flannel jacket tighter, his gaze sweeping over the vast expanse of pines and the gentle slope of the trail ahead. His daughter, Maya, skipped a few feet in front of him, her laughter a bright, tinkling sound that seemed to hang in the crisp air like frost. She was 7, all tangled brown hair, gap-toothed smiles, and an unshakable belief that the world was filled with quiet magic. For Liam, these moments were his church, his sanctuary. Ever since his wife, Sarah, had passed, the wilderness was the only place where the noise in his head went quiet, the only place where he could feel her presence in the rustle of the leaves and the warmth of the sun on his face. He was a park ranger, a man who understood the language of the forest better than the complexities of the human world. He knew how to track a deer, how to read the clouds, how to build a fire from damp wood. He was less certain about how to mend the frayed edges of his own life, how to stretch a ranger's salary to cover worn-out boots and the ever-present threat of a leaky roof on their small, state-owned cabin. But for Maya, he would face any storm, any hardship, with a quiet resolve that was as unyielding as the granite mountains that surrounded them. Today was supposed to be simple. A hike, a thermos of hot cocoa, and a shared bag of trail mix. A memory built from small, affordable joys. As they rounded a bend, the first flakes of snow began to drift down, lazy and white against the dark green of the trees. Maya tilted her head back, her mouth open to catch one on her tongue. It was in that quiet, perfect moment that Liam heard a sound that didn't belong. It wasn't the call of a bird or the snap of a twig. It was a sob, thin and desperate, cutting through the stillness like a shard of glass. He motioned for Maya to stay close, his hand instinctively going to the small pocket knife on his belt, a habit born of years spent navigating the unpredictable. He moved slowly, his boots making no sound, on the pine needle-cushioned earth, his eyes scanning the dense undergrowth, and then he saw her. A little girl, no older than Maya, was huddled at the base of a massive pine tree, her face buried in her knees, her pink snowsuit a stark beacon in the quickly whitening landscape. She was utterly, terrifyingly alone. The sight hit Liam with a physical force, knocking the air from his lungs. Every parental instinct, every ounce of his protective nature, flared to life. He glanced back at Maya, whose own face was a mask of wide-eyed concern, and then he took a slow, deliberate step toward the crying child. He didn't call out, not wanting to startle her further. Instead, he knelt a few feet away, making himself smaller, less threatening. The snow was falling faster now, clinging to his hair and shoulders, but he didn't feel the cold. All he felt was the profound wrongness of this scene. A child lost and weeping in a forest that was rapidly becoming a labyrinth of white. He knew he had to help. That was never a question. What he didn't know, couldn't possibly have known, was that this single act of compassion was about to unravel the carefully constructed solitude of his life and intertwine it with a world of unimaginable wealth, secrets, and a loneliness that mirrored his own in ways he was not yet prepared to understand. The little girl in the pink snowsuit didn't notice him at first. Her world narrowed to the circle of her own grief. Liam remained on one knee, the snow beginning to accumulate on the brim of his hat, his movements slow and intentional. He knew from experience that a startled animal was a dangerous one, and a startled child was even more unpredictable. He took a quiet breath, the cold air stinging his lungs, and spoke in a low, calm voice, the same one he used to soothe Maya after a nightmare. "Hey there," he said softly. "It's okay. You're not alone anymore." The girl's head snapped up, her eyes wide and red, rimmed, glistening with tears that had frozen on her pale cheeks. She looked like a tiny porcelain doll, fragile and lost, with a cascade of dark, silky hair spilling from beneath her knitted hat. Fear warred with exhaustion in her expression. She scooted back, pressing herself against the rough bark of the pine tree, her small hands clenched into fists. Liam didn't move any closer. He simply held up his hands, palms open, a universal sign of peace that transcended species. "My name is Liam," he continued, his voice even and steady. "And this is my daughter Maya." He gestured behind him, where Maya was standing with a look of profound empathy, her small hand clutching the strap of her backpack. She gave a small, hesitant wave. "We were just hiking. It looks like you might have taken a wrong turn." The lost girl sniffled, wiping her nose with the back of her mitten. Her gaze darted between Liam and Maya, assessing them with a caution that seemed too old for her years. I was following a butterfly," she whispered, her voice cracking. "It was blue, and then it was gone." A fresh wave of tears welled in her eyes. "And I can't find my sister." Liam's heart ached for her. A blue butterfly in late autumn was a rare and magical thing, the kind of fleeting beauty a child would naturally chase. He nodded slowly, validating her story without judgment. "That happens sometimes. The woods can be tricky. Do you know your sister's name?" The girl hesitated, a flicker of a warning she'd clearly been given passing through her eyes. "Ilara," she finally said. "My name is Chloe." Liam committed the names to memory. Ilara and Chloe. "Okay, Chloe, that's a beautiful name. We're going to help you find Ilara. But first, we need to get you somewhere warm. The snow is coming down pretty fast, and it's getting cold." He glanced around. The trail markers were already beginning to fade under the fresh layer of white. Visibility was dropping. Staying here wasn't an option. He extended a hand, not to grab her, but to offer. "Our cabin isn't far from here. We have hot chocolate and warm blankets. We can get warm, and then I can call for help. I'm a park ranger. It's my job to help people who get lost." He pointed to the patch on his jacket, a small emblem of the National Park Service. It was a symbol of trust, of safety. Chloe's eyes followed his finger, and a fraction of the tension in her small body seemed to release. She looked at Maya again, who offered another small, encouraging smile. The connection between the two children, unspoken and immediate, did more to build trust than anything Liam could have said. Chloe took a shaky breath and gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. Liam let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "All right then," he said, rising slowly. "Let's get you home, or at least to my home for now." He scooped her up gently, her small, cold body surprisingly light in his arms. She didn't resist. Instead, she buried her face in the crook of his neck, a silent surrender to the kindness of a stranger. As they started back down the trail, with Maya walking closely beside them, the world around them had transformed into a swirling vortex of snow. The path was disappearing, the silence broken only by the crunch of their boots and the sound of Chloe's quiet, shuddering breaths. Liam held her tighter, his mind already racing, calculating the safest route back, completely unaware that the storm he was walking into was far bigger than the one falling from the sky. The cabin was a small, sturdy structure built from timber and stone, nestled in a clearing at the edge of the state park. It wasn't large, and it wasn't modern, but to Liam, it was a fortress of warmth and memory. A thin curl of smoke rose from the chimney, a testament to the fire he'd banked before they left. As he pushed open the heavy wooden door, a wave of familiar comfort washed over them, the scent of wood smoke, old books, and the faint, lingering aroma of the pancakes Maya had insisted on for breakfast. He gently set Chloe down on the worn-out rug in front of the hearth, her small boots leaving damp prints on the floorboards. She stood there for a moment, her eyes wide as she took in her surroundings. The living space was a single, open room, dominated by a large stone fireplace. A mismatched couch and armchair, their fabric faded from years of sunlight, were piled with handmade quilts. Bookshelves overflowed with everything from field guides to children's stories, and the walls were adorned with Maya's crayon drawings and framed photographs of a smiling woman with Liam's eyes. "Sarah, you can take off your wet things," Liam said gently, already helping Maya out of her own damp coat. "We'll get them dry by the fire." Chloe hesitated, her gaze fixed on the flickering flames. She seemed overwhelmed, a tiny ship tossed into a strange and unexpected harbor. Maya, with an empathy that always humbled Liam, seemed to understand. She walked over and took Chloe's mitten-clad hand. "It's okay," she said softly. "My dad knows how to fix everything. He even fixed my doll when her arm fell off." The simple, unwavering faith in her voice seemed to be the final key. Chloe allowed Maya to help her with her zipper, and soon the pink snowsuit was hanging on a hook by the fire, steaming gently. Liam handed her a thick wool blanket, one Sarah had knitted years ago, and wrapped it around her shoulders. She sank into its warmth, her small body finally starting to lose its rigid tension. While Maya chattered away, showing Chloe her collection of uniquely shaped rocks and her favorite stuffed bear, Liam moved to the small kitchen alcove. He filled the old kettle with water and set it on the wood-burning stove, the metal hissing as it made contact with the hot surface. He pulled out 3 mugs, 2 of them chipped, and spooned cocoa powder into each. The simple domestic ritual was grounding. It was what he knew how to do. He could provide warmth. He could provide comfort. He could create a small pocket of safety in a world that often felt anything but. He brought the steaming mugs over, placing them on the low wooden table in front of the couch. Chloe took hers with both hands, her fingers wrapping around the ceramic as if absorbing its heat. She took a tentative sip, and a small, milky mustache appeared on her upper lip. For the first time since he'd found her, a flicker of something other than fear or sadness crossed her face, a hint of a smile. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You're welcome," Liam said, settling into the armchair across from her. He picked up the landline phone, its cord coiled and ancient. "Now, let's see about getting a hold of your sister." He dialed the number for the main ranger station, his mind focused on the protocol. Report the lost child, get a search party organized, contact the local authorities. He was a professional, he knew the steps. But as he listened to the phone ring, his gaze kept returning to the 2 little girls, now sitting side by side on the rug, the firelight dancing in their hair. They were already sharing secrets, their heads bent close together. The storm raged outside, but in here, in this small cabin built on love and loss, there was a fragile, unexpected peace. Liam felt a strange sense of responsibility that went beyond his duty as a ranger. He had brought this child into his home, into his daughter's life, and he felt an overwhelming need to protect her not just from the cold, but from whatever had led her to be so alone in the first place. The connection at the main ranger station was crackly, the storm interfering with the aging phone lines. Liam spoke with his colleague, a gruff but good-hearted man named George, relaying the situation with practiced efficiency. Found a child named Chloe, about 6 or 7 years old, separated from her sister, Ilara, last seen near the Sentinel Pine Trail. She's safe with me at the cabin now, but we need to initiate a search for the sister. George's voice came back, staticky and distant. "Ilara? We had a call about an hour ago. Woman reported her little sister missing, said her name was Chloe, she was frantic, left a callback number, said she was staying at the Blackwood Lodge." Liam felt a wave of relief wash over him. The sister was safe. She had already called for help. "The Blackwood Lodge?" he repeated, surprised. That was the most expensive, exclusive resort in the county, a place of private chalets and valet parking that catered to a clientele far removed from the rustic simplicity of Cedar Valley. It seemed an odd choice for a simple hiking trip. "That's what she said," George confirmed. "I'll patch the info through to the sheriff's department and let them know the child is secure. Here's the number she left." Liam scribbled it down on a notepad by the phone. his pen strokes firm and steady. After hanging up, he turned back to the room. The two girls were now deeply engrossed in a game involving Maya's wooden animal figurines. Chloe was no longer crying, she was laughing, a soft, bell-like sound that filled the small space with warmth. Seeing her safe and smiling, Liam felt the knot of tension in his chest begin to loosen. He waited a few minutes before dialing the number, wanting to give the authorities time to make contact first. He stoked the fire, the logs crackling and spitting, sending a fresh wave of heat into the room. He watched the girls, a quiet observer of their innocent, unfolding friendship. Maya was explaining the hierarchy of her forest creatures, with a wise old owl acting as king and a mischievous fox as his slightly untrustworthy advisor. Chloe was listening with rapt attention, occasionally adding her own imaginative flair. It was a scene of such simple, profound beauty that it made Liam's heart ache with a mixture of love and an old familiar sorrow for the woman who should have been there to see it with him. Finally, he picked up the phone and dialed the number for the Blackwood Lodge. A crisp, professional voice answered on the second ring. "Blackwood Lodge, how may I direct your call?" "I'm calling for a guest," Liam said, his voice steady. "Her name is Alara." There was a brief pause, and the operator's tone shifted, becoming even more polite, more deferential. "One moment, sir, I'll put you right through." The line clicked, and then another voice came on, a woman's voice, sharp with anxiety and laced with an undercurrent of authority. "This is Alara. Do you have news?" "Yes," Liam said calmly. "My name is Liam Brooks. I'm a park ranger. I have your sister. She's safe." A choked sound, something between a sob and a gasp, came from the other end of the line. "Oh, thank God. Is she okay? Is she hurt?" "She's perfectly fine," Liam reassured her. "A little cold and scared when I found her, but she's warm and safe now. She's currently drinking hot chocolate and playing with my daughter." There was a long silence, filled only with the sound of a ragged, relieved breath. "Where are you?" she asked, her voice trembling but regaining its composure. "I'll come right now." Liam gave her the directions to his cabin, explaining that the side road might be tricky in the snow. "I have a four-wheel drive," she said, her tone leaving no room for doubt. "I'll be there as soon as I can. Thank you, truly, thank you." The line went dead. Liam stood there for a moment, the receiver still in his hand. The woman on the phone, Alara, had a voice that commanded attention. It was clipped, precise, and held a power that felt strangely at odds with the frantic worry of a sister who had lost a child. He hung up the phone, a strange sense of unease settling over him. He was glad Chloe was safe, glad her sister had been found. But something about the conversation, about the Blackwood Lodge, about the woman with the authoritative voice, felt like a puzzle piece from a box he had never seen before. The next hour passed in a haze of quiet anticipation. The storm outside seemed to be letting up, the heavy snowfall softening into a gentle, swirling dance. Inside the cabin, a sense of domestic peace had settled. The two girls, having exhausted the possibilities of the wooden animal kingdom, had moved on to drawing. They sat at the low wooden table, their heads bent together in concentration, the scratch of crayons on paper, the only sound besides the crackling fire. Liam watched them from his armchair, a book open on his lap, though he hadn't read a single word. His mind was elsewhere, picturing the sleek, expensive car that was likely making its way down his snow-covered, unpaved road. He tried to imagine the woman who would step out of it. The voice on the phone had been that of someone accustomed to getting what she wanted, someone who expected efficiency and results. It wasn't the voice of the mothers he knew, whose worry was often messy, loud, and frayed at the edges. Alara's worry had been contained, controlled, wrapped in a layer of something that felt like steel. He found himself feeling oddly protective, not just of Chloe, but of the quiet, simple world he had built here. This cabin, with its worn-out furniture and handmade quilts, was a sanctuary from the kind of world that produced voices like Alara's. It was a place where value was measured in warmth and kindness, not in net worth or social standing. He didn't want that other world intruding, didn't want its polished, cold edges scraping against the soft, imperfect life he and Maya had carved out for themselves. He got up and added another log to the fire, the familiar, physical task, a welcome distraction. He glanced out the window, peering through the frost-laced glass. The world was a canvas of white and gray, the trees heavy with snow, their branches bowed. It was beautiful, but it was also isolating. He understood why a person could get lost out here, not just physically, but emotionally. He wondered what had brought Ilara and Chloe to a place like Cedar Valley, so far from the world of luxury resorts and crisp, authoritative voices. Were they running from something, or to something? The headlights appeared first, two sharp white beams cutting through the dusky twilight. They were brighter than the headlights on any vehicle he was used to seeing, a clean, almost blue light that seemed to slice through the falling snow with unnerving precision. Liam's shoulders tensed. He moved to the window, peering out as a large, black SUV, its paint gleaming even under the layer of snow, pulled to a silent stop at the edge of his property. The engine didn't rumble, it hummed, a low electric thrum that spoke of power and advanced engineering. For a moment, nothing happened. The driver's side door remained closed. Then, it opened, and a woman emerged. She was tall and slender, her silhouette sharp against the white landscape. She wore a long dark wool coat that was impeccably tailored, and boots that, while practical, had the distinct look of expensive high-end leather. Her hair, the same dark silky shade as Chloe's, was pulled back into a severe, elegant knot at the base of her neck. She moved with a purpose that bordered on aggression, her long strides eating up the distance to his cabin door. She didn't seem to notice the cold or the snow. Her focus was absolute. Liam opened the door just as she reached the top step. Up close, she was even more striking. Her face was pale, her features sharp and defined high cheekbones, a strong jaw, and eyes the color of a stormy sea. They were red-rimmed from crying, but they held no softness. They were the eyes of a hawk, searching, assessing, missing nothing. "Chloe?" she said, her voice the same one from the phone controlled, clipped, but now laced with a raw, undeniable desperation. Her gaze swept past Liam, into the warmth of the cabin. At the sound of her sister's name, Chloe looked up from her drawing. Her face broke into a wide, relieved smile. "Ilara!" she cried, scrambling to her feet and running toward the door. Ilara's carefully constructed composure shattered. She dropped to her knees on the cold porch, heedless of the snow, and swept Chloe into her arms, burying her face in the little girl's hair. She held her tightly, her whole body trembling with the force of her relief. The hug was not gentle, it was desperate, a fierce, protective embrace that spoke of a terror she had been holding at bay. Liam stood back, giving them their moment, feeling like an intruder in his own home. He watched as Ilara rocked Chloe back and forth, whispering her name over and over again. The steel-clad woman from the phone had vanished, replaced by a sister whose love was as fierce and untamed as the storm that had brought them to his door. After a long moment, Ilara finally looked up at him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Thank you," she said, and this time the words weren't just polite. They were raw, heavy, and full of a gratitude so profound it seemed to cost her something to say them aloud. The air in the small cabin was thick with a strange mixture of profound relief and an awkward, unspoken tension. Ilara had not let go of Chloe's hand since she'd swept her into her arms, her grip a tangible anchor in the aftermath of her panic. She had shed her expensive wool coat, revealing a simple but elegant black cashmere sweater and dark trousers. Everything about her, from the severe cut of her clothes to the way she held herself, screamed of a world far removed from Liam's. She looked like a photograph from a glossy magazine, temporarily and jarringly inserted into the rustic, lived-in pages of his life. She sat stiffly on the edge of the worn-out armchair, Chloe nestled beside her, while Liam busied himself by rekindling the fire. He could feel her eyes on him, studying him with an intensity that made the back of his neck prickle. It wasn't a warm gaze, it was analytical, as if she were trying to deconstruct him, to understand the motivations of a man who would bring a lost child into his home without a second thought. "I don't know how to thank you," she said finally, her voice having regained some of its earlier controlled cadence. The lodge staff were coordinating with the sheriff, but the storm was making it impossible. They were talking about waiting until morning to send a full search party. Her voice tightened on the last words, the horror of that possibility still fresh. "She wouldn't have made it till morning," Liam said simply, his back still to her as he prodded the logs. "It's no trouble. It's what anyone would have done." "No," Ilara countered, her tone sharp and immediate. "It's what you did. Most people don't get involved." The statement hung in the air, a sad commentary on the world she clearly inhabited. Liam turned to face her, leaning against the stone mantelpiece. His gaze was steady, his posture relaxed, a stark contrast to her rigid formality. "Maybe you've been around the wrong people," he said, not as a challenge, but as a simple observation. A flicker of something surprise, annoyance, crossed her face before being quickly suppressed. She changed the subject. "I'd like to compensate you for your time, for the trouble." She reached for the sleek, minimalist handbag that sat beside her chair, its leather so fine it seemed to absorb the firelight. Liam held up a hand, stopping her before she could even open it. "That's not necessary." "Please," she insisted, her jaw tightening. "I don't accept payment for helping a child." His tone was quiet, but it was absolute, leaving no room for negotiation. It was a boundary, clear and unyielding, and Ilara looked genuinely stunned, as if she had never encountered a problem that couldn't be solved with money. She stared at him, her stormy eyes narrowing slightly. He wasn't playing hard to get, he wasn't posturing. He was simply, genuinely refusing her. The concept seemed utterly foreign to her. For a long, silent moment, the only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the soft breathing of the two girls, who were now whispering to each other again, their shared adventure having forged an instant, powerful bond. Ilara finally withdrew her hand from her bag, her posture becoming even more rigid, if that was possible. "As you wish," she said, her voice clipped. The warmth of her initial relief had receded, replaced by a cool, formal politeness that felt like a shield. Liam knew, in that moment, that he had somehow thrown her off balance, and he had a feeling that Ilara Thorne was not a woman who liked to feel off balance. The atmosphere remained strained as the minutes ticked by. Ilara was clearly anxious to leave, to return to the sterile, controlled environment of her luxury lodge, yet the snow outside continued to fall, a silent, swirling curtain that trapped them together in the cabin's rustic warmth. Liam made a fresh pot of coffee, more for something to do with his hands than out of any real desire for it. He offered a cup to Ilara, who accepted with a curt nod, her fingers barely brushing his as she took the mug. He noticed the watch on her wrist then. It was understated, almost severe in its design-a-thin, platinum band, a dark, starless face with no numbers, just a single, sweeping, second hand. It was the kind of elegant, minimalist piece that cost more than his truck, a quiet but undeniable symbol of a different stratosphere of wealth. She caught him looking and instinctively pulled the sleeve of her sweater down, a small, unconscious gesture of concealment. It was another brick in the wall she was so carefully maintaining between them. He decided to try a different approach, to break through the rigid formality with simple, human connection. "Maya was worried about her," he said, nodding toward Chloe, who was now sleepily leaning her head against Ilara's shoulder. "She knows what it's like to feel lost." Ilara's gaze softened for the first time since her initial wave of relief. She looked down at Chloe, her hand coming up to gently stroke her hair. "She's my responsibility," she said, her voice losing some of its edge. "Her parents, they're not in the picture. It's just me and her." The admission was a tiny crack in her armor, a glimpse of the vulnerability she was working so hard to hide. "I understand," Liam said quietly. "It's just me and Maya too." Her eyes snapped up to meet his, a question in them. "My wife passed away 3 years ago," he explained, his voice low and even. He didn't say it for sympathy, he said it to build a bridge, to show her that this cabin, this life, was also built on a foundation of loss. For a moment, the chasm between their two worlds seemed to shrink. She saw him not just as a ranger, a stranger, but as a fellow traveler in the lonely landscape of single parenthood. The shared experience, unspoken but deeply felt, created a fragile truce in the quiet room. "I'm sorry," she said, and this time, the words were not a formality. They were a genuine acknowledgement of a pain she suddenly, unexpectedly, recognized. The conversation faltered after that, retreating into a safer, more neutral territory. They talked about the weather, the severity of the storm, the likelihood of the roads being cleared by morning. Ilara asked about his job as a ranger, her questions precise and intelligent, but devoid of any real personal curiosity. She was gathering data, not making conversation. Liam, in turn, answered her questions without offering any more personal details than were necessary. It was a carefully choreographed dance of avoidance, two people circling a truth they were not yet ready to acknowledge, that their chance encounter had stirred something in both of them, something that was equal parts curiosity and unease. Maya, bless her innocent heart, was the one who finally shattered the polite facade. She looked up from the floor, where she was putting her animal figurines away in a small wooden box. "Are you a queen?" she asked, her gaze fixed on Ilara. Liam nearly choked on his coffee. Ilara blinked, taken aback. I don't think so. Why would you ask that?" "Because you look like one," Maya said, with the simple, irrefutable logic of a child. "You sit very straight and you have a sad face. All the queens in my storybooks are sad." The observation was so direct, so painfully accurate, that the air went still. Ilara's mask of composure slipped, just for a second, and Liam saw a flash of raw, unadulterated pain in her eyes before she quickly shuttered it away. She forced a small, tight smile. "Well, I'm not a queen," she said softly. "I'm just tired." The conversation died completely after that. Ilara retreated into a stony silence, her gaze fixed on the fire, her jaw set. Liam didn't push. He knew a closed door when he saw one. He got up and began to prepare the small guest cot in the corner of the room, pulling out fresh linens from a storage chest. It was clear they weren't going anywhere tonight. As he unfolded the cot, he could feel her watching him again, her gaze a physical weight. He was offering her a bed, a safe harbor for the night, an act of simple, human decency. And yet he had the distinct feeling that for Ilara Thorne, accepting help was a far more complicated and perhaps more terrifying prospect than being lost in the storm. The night was long and quiet. The cabin, a small bubble of warmth against the vast, cold darkness of the forest. The wind had died down, and the only sound was the low, steady crackle of the embers in the fireplace and the soft, rhythmic breathing of the two sleeping children. Chloe was curled up on the cot Liam had prepared, tucked tightly under a thick quilt, her face peaceful in the dim light. Maya was in her own bed in the small, partitioned-off room that served as her bedroom, her dreams no doubt filled with sad queens and talking foxes. Liam had taken the armchair, a familiar position for him on nights when worry kept sleep at bay. He hadn't been able to settle, his mind replaying the day's events on a loop. Across the room, Ilara sat on the couch, a blanket pulled up to her chin, though he knew she wasn't sleeping. He could see the faint outline of her silhouette, rigid and still, staring into the dying fire. She was a sentry, guarding her sister, guarding her secrets, guarding the fragile fortress of her own heart. He thought about Maya's innocent, piercing question, "Are you a queen?" The more he thought about it, the more it fit. Ilara had a kind of regal, lonely bearing, a woman encased in the invisible armor of wealth and power. And the sadness. Yes, Maya had been right about that too. It was there, in the tense line of her shoulders, in the guarded depths of her stormy eyes. It was the sadness of a person who has everything and, perhaps, nothing at all. He must have dozed off, because he was startled awake by a soft sound from across the room. He opened his eyes to see Ilara standing by the window, her arms wrapped around herself, looking out at the moonlit, snow-covered landscape. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world that was pristine, silent, and achingly beautiful. She didn't seem to know he was awake. Her posture was different, less guarded. The weight of the world seemed to be pressing down on her, her shoulders slumped slightly, her head bowed. In that unguarded moment, she didn't look like a CEO or a woman of power. She looked like a ghost, haunting the edges of a life she couldn't quite touch. He watched her for a long time, his heart filled with a strange, protective ache. He didn't understand her, not really. He didn't know the first thing about her world of luxury lodges and platinum watches, but he understood loneliness. He knew what it felt like to stand in a quiet room in the middle of the night, feeling like the only person left awake in the entire world. He knew the heavy weight of responsibility, the constant, low-grade fear of failing the one person who depended on you completely. Without thinking, he spoke, his voice a low rumble in the stillness. "It's beautiful, isn't it, after the storm?" She startled, turning quickly, her hand flying to her chest. The mask of composure slammed back into place. "I didn't realize you were awake," she said, her voice tight. "I can't sleep much these days," he admitted, not wanting her to feel like she had been caught. He rose from the chair and walked to stand a few feet from her, also looking out the window. The quiet helps. They stood in silence for a moment, two strangers sharing a moonlit view. "I shouldn't have come here," she said suddenly, her voice barely a whisper. "To Cedar Valley. It was a mistake." "Why was it a mistake?" Liam asked gently. "Because places like this, they make you remember things you've spent a long time trying to forget," she said, her voice thick with an emotion she quickly suppressed. She turned away from the window, from him, and retreated back to the couch, pulling the blanket around her like a shield. The conversation was over. But the crack in her armor remained, and Liam found himself wanting, more than he should, to see what lay beneath. Morning arrived. With a clean, blinding light, the sun reflecting off the fresh snow with an intensity that made the world look brand new. The air was still and cold, every surface coated in a layer of sparkling frost. Inside the cabin, the smell of brewing coffee and frying bacon filled the air, a warm, comforting scent that stood in stark defiance to the formal tension of the previous night. Liam was at the wood-burning stove, his movements efficient and practiced, a man completely at home in his own small kingdom. He was making pancakes, a Saturday morning ritual that he had decided to deploy on this unexpected Tuesday, hoping its familiar comfort could smooth over the awkwardness that lingered between him and his guest. The two girls were already at the table, chattering excitedly. Chloe, rested and safe, seemed to have completely shed the fear of the previous day. She was a different child this morning, bright, curious, and full of questions. Elara sat with them, a mug of coffee cradled in her hands. She had tried to help, but her unfamiliarity with the rustic kitchen was so profound that Liam had gently steered her toward the table with a quiet, "Why don't you just supervise?" She had acquiesced with a tight smile, looking both relieved and vaguely embarrassed. She was dressed in the same elegant trousers and cashmere sweater from the day before, but her hair was slightly less severe, a few stray strands escaping her knot. She looked, Liam thought, like a woman who had slept in her clothes, which she probably had. As he flipped the last pancake, he watched her. She was listening intently to Maya's rambling story about a dream she'd had, her head tilted, a small, genuine smile gracing her lips. The morning light caught the platinum of her watch, a stark reminder of the chasm between their worlds. But in this moment, sharing a cramped table in a ranger's cabin, she didn't look like a queen. She looked like a woman who was starving for something she didn't know how to name. "These are surprisingly good," Elara said, after taking her first bite of pancake. The compliment was delivered with a hint of genuine surprise, as if she hadn't expected a man who lived in the woods to be capable of producing something so light and fluffy. Liam just grinned, setting a plate down for himself. Ranger School has a surprisingly robust culinary arts program. The small joke, lame as it was, worked. She laughed, a real, unforced laugh that crinkled the corners of her eyes. The sound was so unexpected, so lovely, that Liam found himself momentarily stunned. It was the first time he had heard it, and it was like a burst of sunlight in the quiet room. The meal progressed in a state of fragile peace. The girls dominated the conversation, their easy, innocent chatter filling the space that the adults couldn't. They made plans to build a snow fort, to have a snowball fight, to teach Chloe how to identify animal tracks, a skill Maya was particularly proud of. Elara listened, her earlier stiffness melting away with each passing minute. She seemed fascinated by this small, self-contained world, a world where joy was found in simple things, where connections were forged over shared meals and whispered secrets. After breakfast, while Liam cleaned up, Ilara followed the girls outside. He watched them through the kitchen window. The world was a pristine winter wonderland, and the two children were embracing it with unadulterated joy. They were making snow angels, their laughter echoing in the still air. Ilara stood at the edge of the clearing, her arms crossed, a small, wistful smile on her face. She was an observer, not a participant. Then, Maya ran up to her, tugging on her hand, trying to pull her into the snow. Ilara resisted at first, shaking her head, the automatic refusal of someone who doesn't do messy, but Maya was persistent, and after a moment, Ilara relented. She let Maya pull her down into the soft, deep snow, and together they made a slightly awkward, lopsided snow angel next to the two smaller, more perfect ones. Liam leaned against the sink, a dish towel in his hand, his heart giving a strange, unfamiliar lurch. In that moment, watching the reclusive, powerful Ilara Thorne lie in the snow with two laughing children, he saw not the queen, but the woman. And he realized, with a sense of dawning dread and undeniable hope, that he wanted to know her. The spell of the morning was broken by the mundane reality of a cleared road and a working cell signal. Around mid-morning, a text message pinged on Ilara's phone, a crisp, impersonal notification from the Blackwood Lodge, informing her that the main highway was now open. The news landed in the cozy cabin with the quiet thud of an ending. The easy laughter faded, replaced by the familiar low-level hum of polite formality. It was time for them to go. The departure was as awkward as their arrival had been. Ilara dressed Chloe in her now dry pink snowsuit, her movements efficient and a little too quick. Chloe, however, was in no hurry to leave. She clung to Maya, the two of them exchanging a series of solemn, heartfelt promises to be best friends forever. They even made a pact to write letters, an idea that seemed charmingly archaic in the presence of a woman who likely ran a billion-dollar empire from her smartphone. Liam stood by the door, his hands in his pockets, feeling like a bystander at the end of a play he hadn't known he was a part of. He didn't know what to say. "Thank you for breakfast," seemed laughably inadequate. "It was nice having you," felt like a lie, because it had been more than nice. It had been disruptive, unsettling, and strangely, wonderfully alive. He had felt more in the past 24 hours than he had in the last 3 years. Ilara finally straightened up, her own coat on, her handbag clutched in her hand like a shield. The wall was back up, her expression once again cool and unreadable. She turned to Liam, her gaze level. "Again, I can't thank you enough for everything," she said, her voice the epitome of polite dismissal. "If you ever find yourself in need of anything at all, please," she trailed off, pulling a slim metallic business card from her coat pocket. She held it out to him. Liam looked at the card, then back at her face. He didn't take it. "I won't," he said, not unkindly. "But thank you." The refusal hung in the air between them, another quiet challenge to her world, another boundary she hadn't expected. A flicker of something frustration, respect, crossed her face. She slowly withdrew her hand and slipped the card back into her pocket. It was a silent acknowledgement of his terms. He would not be bought, would not be indebted, would not be another asset in her portfolio of well-managed relationships. He was simply Liam Brooks, park ranger, a man who lived by a code she was only just beginning to comprehend. She herded Chloe toward the door, her hand resting on the little girl's shoulder. At the threshold, Chloe turned back, her eyes wide and sad. "Bye, Liam. Bye, Maya," she whispered. Maya waved, her own face a mirror of Chloe's sorrow. "Bye, Chloe." And then they were gone. Liam watched from the doorway as the black SUV started with its near-silent hum and pulled away, its tires leaving clean, sharp tracks in the pristine snow. The cabin suddenly felt too quiet, too empty. The air, which had been filled with laughter and the smell of pancakes just an hour before, now felt thin and cold. He looked down at Maya, who was staring at the empty space where the SUV had been, her lower lip trembling. He knelt and pulled her into a hug, his own heart aching with a strange, hollow feeling he couldn't name. He had protected his quiet world. He had kept the outside from intruding. But as he held his daughter, he couldn't shake the feeling that he hadn't just closed the door on a stranger, he had closed it on a possibility. And the silence that rushed in to fill the space she left behind was deafening. The days that followed Ilara's departure settled into a rhythm that was both familiar and jarringly different. On the surface, everything returned to normal. Liam went back to his patrols, his boots crunching on the packed snow of the familiar trails. He mended a broken fence at the park's northern edge, cleared a fallen tree from a service road, and filed his weekly reports. He and Maya fell back into their quiet rowdiness-shared dinners, story time by the fire, weekend hikes in the silent, winter-wrapped forest. But the silence was different now. It was heavier. It was filled with the ghost of a different kind of quiet, the one that had been shared with two unexpected guests. Liam found himself pausing at the Sentinel Pine Trail, the place where he'd found Chloe, and staring into the woods as if he might find an echo of her there. The cabin, which had always been his sanctuary, now felt a little too big, a little too still. He would catch himself glancing at the armchair where Ilara had sat so rigidly, or at the spot on the rug where she had knelt to hug her sister. The memory of her was an imprint on the air, a scent he couldn't quite place but couldn't seem to escape. Maya was quieter too. She didn't mention Chloe or Ilara by name, as if sensing it was a topic her father wasn't ready to discuss. But her drawings were filled with new characters: a little girl in a pink snowsuit, a tall, sad queen with dark hair, and a big black car that had wings. She would leave them on the kitchen table for him to find, small, silent messages from a heart that was missing its new friend. One afternoon, about a week after they had left, Liam found Maya sitting on the porch steps, staring out at the road, a hopeful, expectant look on her face. He sat down beside her, the cold of the wood seeping through his jeans. "What are you watching?" "For?" he asked gently. "Just cars," she said, not looking at him. He knew which car she was watching for. He put an arm around her small shoulders and pulled her close. "You miss them, don't you?" he said, finally giving voice to the thing they had both been avoiding. She nodded, her head burrowed into his side. "Chloe promised she'd write me a letter." "I know, sweetie," he said, his own throat tightening. "Sometimes people get busy. Sometimes they forget." But he knew Ilara wouldn't forget. She wasn't the type. If she hadn't reached out, it was a deliberate choice. It was a confirmation of the wall she had put back up, a wall he had, in his own way, helped her build. He had insisted on his world, his rules, his refusal of anything she had to offer. He had drawn a line in the snow, and she had respected it. He had gotten what he wanted. His life was his own again, quiet, predictable, and safe. So why did it feel so profoundly, unbearably empty? Back in her own world, a world of floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a city that never slept, Ilara was drowning in the silence she had once craved. Her penthouse apartment was a minimalist masterpiece of glass, steel, and muted colors, a space so pristine and orderly that it felt more like a museum than a home. She had returned to her life, to the relentless demands of her company, Thorne Dynamics, a global leader in AI and predictive analytics. Her days were once again a blur of board meetings, conference calls, and data streams. She wore tailored suits, commanded rooms full of powerful men, and made decisions that affected markets on the other side of the world. She was back in control. She was the queen in her castle once more. But the castle was a cage. The silence in her apartment wasn't peaceful, it was sterile. The view of the city lights wasn't beautiful, it was a constant reminder of her own isolation. She found herself standing at the window late at night, a glass of expensive, untouched wine in her hand, staring down at the endless stream of headlights, and all she could see was the image of a small, timber and stone cabin, a curl of smoke rising from its chimney, a warm yellow light glowing in its windows. She had tried to work, to lose herself in the familiar, comforting logic of algorithms and code, but her focus was shattered. Her mind kept drifting back to the smell of wood smoke, the taste of slightly burnt pancakes, the sound of a child's unrestrained laughter. She would be in the middle of a high-stakes negotiation and suddenly remember the feel of Chloe's small hand in hers, the fierce, protective love she had felt in that moment of reunion. She had a team of assistants, a personal chef, a driver, an army of people paid to make her life seamless and efficient. But not one of them could replicate the simple, profound comfort of a cup of hot chocolate made by a man with kind eyes and calloused hands. She looked at the things that surrounded her, the abstract art on the walls, the designer furniture, the cutting-edge technology, and felt nothing. They were just things, possessions, hollow symbols of a success that had cost her everything that mattered. She had fled to Cedar Valley to escape her life, but she had ended up finding a piece of it she hadn't known was missing. And now, back in the heart of her empire, she felt more lost than she had in the snow-covered woods. She had spent years building walls to protect herself, to keep the world at a safe, manageable distance. But Liam Brooks, with his quiet dignity and his unwavering moral compass, had walked right through them without even trying. He hadn't been intimidated by her, hadn't wanted anything from her. He had simply seen her, and in doing so, he had shown her the stark, desolate emptiness of the life she had built for herself. The choice to retreat back into her world of power and influence had seemed logical at the time. It was what she knew, it was safe. But as the days bled into one another, each one as silent and sterile as the last, she began to understand a terrifying new truth. The greatest risk wasn't letting someone in, it was living a life where no one ever could. The package arrived on a Tuesday, an ordinary-looking cardboard box left on the porch of the ranger station by a local courier. It had no return address, only a simple, typewritten label addressed to Maya Brooks. Liam eyed it with suspicion, his first thought being that it was from a journalist or some strange admirer who had pieced together their story from the whispers that had inevitably followed Ilara's brief, dramatic appearance in Cedar Valley. He had considered not even telling Maya about it, wanting to protect her from any further intrusion into their quiet lives. But the simple, clean label, devoid of any corporate logos or sensationalism, gave him pause. He brought it inside and set it on the kitchen table, his curiosity warring with his caution. When Maya came home from school, her eyes lit up at the sight of it. "Is that for me?" she asked, her voice full of a hope that made Liam's heart ache. He nodded, and she tore into it with an eagerness he hadn't seen in weeks. Inside, nestled in a bed of soft, white tissue paper, were three things. The first was a beautiful, handcrafted wooden box, its lid inlaid with a delicate carving of a blue butterfly. The second was a set of professional grade-colored pencils, a vibrant rainbow of hues that far surpassed the waxy, broken crayons she was used to. The third was a single folded sheet of thick, cream-colored stationery. Maya opened the note first, her brow furrowed in concentration as she read the elegant, looping script aloud. "Dear Maya," she began, "I hope this finds you well. Chloe talks about you all the time. She says you are the best snow fort architect in the whole world. I've been thinking about what you said, about sad queens. Maybe you're right. But I think even queens are allowed to have friends who remind them how to smile. I hope you like the pencils. Keep drawing your beautiful pictures. The world needs more of them. Your friend, Ilara." Maya read the note twice, her small finger tracing Ilara's name. A slow, radiant smile spread across her face, the first genuine, unclouded one Liam had seen since the black SUV had driven away. She then opened the wooden box. Inside, lying on a bed of dark velvet, was a small silver locket, shaped like a heart. It was simple, elegant, and undoubtedly real. Maya gasped, her hands trembling slightly as she lifted it out. She clicked it open, and on the inside were two tiny, perfectly rendered engravings. On one side was a pine tree. On the other, a blue butterfly. It was a secret language, a story told in symbols that only the two of them, and perhaps Liam, could understand. Liam stood by, his arms crossed, a lump forming in his throat. This wasn't a gift of wealth, it wasn't a transaction. It was a gesture of profound, thoughtful connection. It was a bridge, built of silver and paper and wood, reaching across the chasm between their two worlds. Ilara had not forgotten. She had listened. She had understood. She had sent a message, not to him, but to the heart of his world, his daughter. And as he watched Maya clutch the locket to her chest, her eyes shining with a joy that was pure and absolute, Liam felt the carefully constructed walls of his own resolve begin to crumble. He had been so focused on protecting their world from hers that he hadn't considered the possibility that the two could, perhaps, coexist. He had seen her wealth as a barrier, a threat. But this gift, this quiet, thoughtful act of kindness, wasn't about money. It was about memory. It was about friendship. And it was a clear, undeniable sign that Ilara Thorne was not letting go. The silver locket became Maya's most prized possession. She wore it every day, a small, cool weight against her skin, a constant, tangible reminder of the friends she had made in the snow. She would open it at random times, tracing the tiny engravings with her fingertip, a small, secret smile on her face. The gift had brought a light back into her eyes, and with it, a new, more persistent line of questioning for her father. "Do you think Ilara will come back?" she would ask over dinner, her gaze steady and hopeful. "When is Chloe going to send me a real letter?" At first, Liam would deflect, offering vague, non-committal answers. "I don't know, sweetie. They're very busy." But as the days turned into weeks, his own certainty began to waver. The gesture of the gift had unsettled him, forcing him to re-examine the neat, simple narrative he had constructed about Ilara. He had cast her as the powerful, untouchable queen, a woman from a world so different from his own that any real connection was impossible. He had told himself he was protecting his family from the inevitable heartbreak that would come from trying to bridge that gap. But was that the whole truth? Or was he also protecting himself? Was he using his role as a father, his duty to Maya, as a shield to hide his own fear? The fear of letting someone in again. The fear of risking the quiet, fragile peace he had so carefully rebuilt after Sarah's death. He was afraid of the mess, of the complication, of the potential for more loss. He had become a man who lived within the safe, predictable boundaries of his own making. Ilara, with her quiet power and her surprising vulnerability, had threatened those boundaries. One evening, as he was tucking Maya into bed, she held up the locket, the firelight catching on its polished surface. "Daddy," she said, her voice soft and serious. "You look sad, too, like Ilara." The words, so simple and direct, struck him with the force of a physical blow. He sat on the edge of her bed, the weight of her observation settling heavily in his chest. He looked around the small, cozy room, at the handmade quilts and the crayon drawings, the symbols of the life he had fought so hard to preserve. And he realized that in his effort to keep it safe, he had also kept it small. He had been so focused on surviving that he had forgotten how to live. "You're right, sweetie," he said, his voice thick. I think I've been a little sad for a long time." He kissed her forehead, the familiar scent of her hair, a comforting anchor. "But maybe," he added more to himself than to her, "it's time to change that." That night, he didn't sit in the dark and brood. He walked out to the small, cold workshop behind the cabin, a place filled with the smell of sawdust and engine oil, his other sanctuary. He flipped on the single, bare light bulb. He hadn't touched it in years, but he knew exactly where it was. Tucked away in a dusty old toolbox under a pile of Sarah's gardening gloves was the business card Ilara had tried to give him. He had picked it up after she'd left, unable to bring himself to throw it away. It was made of a strange, dark metal, cool to the touch, her name and a single, cryptic symbol embossed on its surface. No phone number, no address, just a name. He held it in his calloused palm, the contrast between the rough skin of his hand and the sleek, perfect object, a perfect metaphor for their two worlds. For the first time, he didn't see it as a symbol of her power or a tool of her world. He saw it for what it was, an invitation, and he finally felt ready to consider accepting it. The decision, once made, felt less like a leap and more like a surrender. It was an admission that the quiet, ordered life he had so fiercely protected had become a cage of its own. The next morning, Liam woke with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. The air was different. The sunlight slanting through the cabin window seemed brighter. Even the coffee, brewed in the same old percolator, tasted less bitter. He knew he couldn't just call her. The card had no number. It was a symbol, not a tool. Reaching her would require a different kind of effort, a step into her world on his own terms. His first move was to the small, dusty public library in the center of town. He sat at a clunky desktop computer, the dial-up connection screeching as it connected to the internet. He typed her name, Alara Thorne, into the search bar. The results were overwhelming. Articles from financial journals, profiles in tech magazines, paparazzi photos of her leaving exclusive events. She was the CEO of Thorne Dynamics, a visionary, a recluse, a genius. The company's headquarters was a gleaming tower of glass and steel in a city that felt a world away from Cedar Valley. There was no direct contact information, of course. People like Alara Thorne were insulated by layers of assistants, publicists, and security teams. But Liam wasn't looking for a direct line. He was looking for a pattern, a clue, a way in that wasn't a frontal assault. He scrolled through articles, piecing together fragments of her life. She was a major benefactor of environmental causes. She had endowed a chair at a university for research into sustainable energy. She was on the board of a nonprofit dedicated to preserving wilderness areas. These weren't the actions of a woman who was only interested in power and profit. They were the actions of someone who, despite her world, still cared about his. He found what he was looking for in a small, almost buried article about a recent land acquisition by the Blue Butterfly Foundation, a private conservancy group. The foundation had just purchased a massive tract of undeveloped forest land bordering a national park, with the stated goal of protecting it from logging and development. The name of the foundation was no coincidence. It was a message, and the article mentioned an upcoming, low-key fundraising gala for the foundation's top-tier donors. It was an exclusive event, invitation, only held at a private botanical garden in the city. Getting in would be next to impossible for a park ranger from Cedar Valley. But Liam wasn't planning on going as a guest. He had an idea, a long shot, but one that felt right. It was a plan that didn't involve asking for a handout or using her name. It was a plan that would allow him to meet her on his own terms, to offer something of his own, to show her that he was more than the man she had rescued from the snow. He logged off the computer, a slow, determined smile spreading across his face. He didn't know if it would work. He didn't know what he would say if it did. But, for the first time in a long time, he felt the thrill of the unknown, the pull of a future that wasn't already written. He was stepping off the well-worn trail of his life and into the wild, and it felt, exhilaratingly, like coming home. The days leading up to the gala were a blur of quiet, focused activity. Liam's plan was audacious, and its success hinged on a series of small, perfectly executed steps. First, he took a rare few days of personal leave from his ranger duties, entrusting Maya to the care of his gruff but reliable colleague George and his wife. He then emptied his meager savings account, a sum that felt both terrifyingly small and monumentally significant. Most of it went to a rented truck and the careful purchase of a specific, high-quality block of reclaimed timberwood from a fallen giant, a tree that had stood for centuries in a forest not unlike the one he patrolled. The rest was for gas and the cheapest motel room he could find on the outskirts of the city. He spent the next 48 hours in his workshop, the air thick with the smell of sawdust and focused determination. The sound of his tools, the whisper of the handplane, the bite of the chisel, the rhythmic rasp of sandpaper became a form of meditation. He worked with a precision and artistry that few people knew he possessed. He wasn't just a ranger, he was a craftsman, a skill inherited from his grandfather. He poured every ounce of his grief, his hope, and his unspoken feelings for Alara into the wood. He was carving a story, his story, into the grain of the ancient timber. It was a bench. But it was more than a bench. It was a piece of the wilderness, a tangible piece of the peace he had found there. The design was simple, elegant, and strong. The legs were carved to resemble the sweeping roots of a pine tree, and the backrest was a delicate, intricate lattice of interwoven branches. And in the very center, so subtle it was almost invisible unless you knew to look for it, he carved a single, perfect blue butterfly. On the day of the gala, he loaded the finished bench into the back of the rented truck, wrapping it carefully in old quilts to protect it from the slightest scratch. He drove into the city, the towering skyscrapers and roaring traffic, a jarring contrast to the quiet solitude of his mountain home. He felt like a foreigner in a strange land, his worn flannel and dusty boots a stark anomaly in a world of polished chrome and hurried ambition. He found the botanical garden, a lush, green oasis walled off from the concrete jungle that surrounded it. He didn't try to go through the main entrance, where elegantly dressed guests were already arriving, their laughter tinkling in the early evening air. Instead, he drove around to the service entrance, a simple, chain-link gate manned by a bored-looking security guard. Liam got out of the truck, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it. The moment of truth. He approached the guard, not with the swagger of a man who belonged, but with the quiet, unshakable confidence of a man on a mission. "Evening," he said, his voice calm. "I have a delivery for the Blue Butterfly Foundation." The guard eyed him, his gaze taking in the dusty truck and Liam's simple attire. "Don't have anything on my list about a delivery." "It's a surprise," Liam said, his expression never wavering. "A donation, for the auction," he gestured to the back of the truck, "from a friend of the forest." The guard was skeptical, but something in Liam's steady gaze, in his utter lack of pretense, made him pause. It was so unusual, so outside the normal protocol, that it was almost believable. After a moment of hesitation and a quick, crackly radio call to a superior who was likely too busy to care, the guard shrugged. "All right, pal, pull it in, but make it quick." Liam let out a slow, silent breath of relief. He had made it past the first gate. Now, he just had to find a way to get the bench, and himself, in front of the one person he had traveled all this way to see. The botanical garden was a labyrinth of glass and green, a stunning, man-made paradise humming with the quiet energy of wealth and influence. The fundraising gala was in full swing in the main conservatory, a massive glass dome where elegantly dressed guests mingled beneath towering palm trees and exotic flowers. The air was thick with the scent of orchids and expensive perfume, the clinking of champagne glasses a constant, musical undercurrent to the low murmur of conversation. Liam, having successfully navigated his bench through a series of service corridors with the help of a surprised but willing catering staffer, now stood at the edge of the event, a ghost in a flannel shirt. He had placed the bench in a quiet, secluded alcove just off the main path, where it was illuminated by a single, soft spotlight. It looked like it belonged there, a piece of rustic art in a temple of cultivated beauty. He watched the crowd from a distance, searching for her. He saw powerful men in tuxedos, women in glittering gowns, all of them moving with the easy, confident grace of people who knew they were in their natural habitat. And then he saw her. Ilara stood near a cascading waterfall, a glass of champagne held loosely in her hand. She was wearing a simple, floor-length gown of deep, midnight blue silk. It was understated, yet it made every other woman in the room look overdone. Her hair was swept up in an elegant chignon, and a single diamond-studded pin, shaped like a butterfly, glittered at her shoulder. She was breathtaking, but she was also alone. She was surrounded by people, yet she was an island, a polite smile fixed on her face, her eyes distant and sad. She was the queen, back in her castle, and Maya had been right, she was not happy. Liam's heart ached for her. He knew he had to approach her, but the thought of crossing that crowded, glittering room made his palms sweat. He was out of his element, an intruder in a world he didn't understand. He felt a surge of doubt, a voice in his head whispering that this was a mistake, that he should just turn around and leave. But then he thought of Maya. He thought of her unwavering faith, her simple courage. He thought of the locket and the way her face had lit up. He took a deep breath, the fragrant air of the conservatory feeling suddenly thin and hard to breathe. He squared his shoulders and started to walk. He moved through the crowd, his boots silent on the marble floor. He drew a few curious glances, a few raised eyebrows, but he didn't care. His focus was singular, absolute. He was a man walking a trail, and she was at the end of it. He stopped a few feet from her, waiting for her to notice him. She was listening to a portly man in a tuxedo who was pontificating about market trends. She was nodding politely, her expression blank, her eyes a million miles away. Then, her gaze drifted past the man's shoulder and landed on Liam. Her eyes widened. The polite smile on her face vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated shock. The champagne glass trembled in her hand. The portly man, noticing he had lost his audience, trailed off, confused. Ilara didn't seem to hear him. She took a small, involuntary step forward, her lips parting as if to say his name, though no sound came out. The world around them, with its music, its laughter, its glittering lights, seemed to fade away. In that moment, there was only the two of them, a park ranger and a billionaire, standing in the middle of a man-made jungle, the space between them crackling with all the things they had left unsaid. Ilara's shock was a fragile, beautiful thing, a mask shattering to reveal the raw, vulnerable woman beneath. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, she simply stared at him, her stormy eyes wide with a disbelief that was slowly, miraculously, morphing into hope. The man in the tuxedo, flustered by her sudden inattention, cleared his throat and made a hasty retreat, melting back into the crowd. Ilara didn't notice him leave. Her entire world had narrowed to the man standing before her, a man who was so profoundly out of place and yet looked so completely, resolutely, at home in his own skin. "Liam," she finally breathed, the name a soft, wondrous whisper. "What are you? How did you—" He gave a small, wry smile, the first genuine expression she had seen on his face in weeks. "The guard at the service entrance is a surprisingly reasonable man." Her mind was reeling. She couldn't process it. Him, here, in the heart of her world, a world she had been so certain he despised. He hadn't come to ask for anything. He hadn't used her name. He had found his own way in, on his own terms. It was the most audacious, most stubborn, most Liam thing he could have possibly done. "I don't understand," she said, her voice still shaky. "Why are you here?" "I brought you something," he said simply. He gestured toward the quiet alcove where the bench sat, bathed in a soft, solitary light. "A donation. From a friend of the forest." She followed his gaze, and when she saw the bench, she gasped. She walked toward it, her movements slow, almost dreamlike. She ran a hand over the smooth, polished wood, her fingers tracing the intricately carved branches, the sweeping roots. It was exquisite, a masterpiece of natural art, imbued with a soul and a story that no factory-made piece of furniture could ever possess. And then she saw it. Tucked into the lattice of branches, so perfectly integrated it was almost hidden, was the butterfly. A small, delicate blue butterfly, its wings outstretched as if in mid-flight. A tear slid down her cheek, hot and unexpected. She didn't bother to wipe it away. She turned back to Liam, who had remained where he was, giving her space. Her heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of her chest. It was more than a gift. It was a statement. It was a piece of his world, of his soul, offered freely, without expectation. It was an answer to a question she hadn't even known how to ask. "It's beautiful," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." "It's where you belong," he said, his voice low and steady. "Not here," he gestured to the glittering, superficial chaos of the gala. "There, in the quiet, in the wild, where things are real." She looked from the bench to his face, and in his eyes she saw no judgment, no anger, only a deep, abiding understanding. He wasn't just offering her a bench, he was offering her a way back, not to the person she was, but to the person he knew she could be, the person he had seen, even when she couldn't see it herself. The rest of the gala passed in a surreal, dreamlike blur for Ilara. She moved through the motions, smiling, nodding, shaking hands, but her mind and her heart were elsewhere. They were in a quiet alcove, with a wooden bench and a man who smelled of sawdust and pine. After her initial emotional reaction, a sense of professional composure had kicked in. She had immediately spoken to the event organizer, ensuring the bench was given the prime spot in the live auction. It was introduced simply as the Forester's Bench, a one-of-a-kind piece donated anonymously. When the bidding started, it was fierce. The story of the mysterious last-minute donation had already circulated, and the raw, natural beauty of the piece spoke for itself. Wealthy patrons, eager for a unique piece of art with a compelling backstory, drove the price higher and higher. Alara stood at the back of the room, watching, her heart a tangled mess of pride, anxiety, and something that felt a lot like love. Liam had retreated, not wanting to be part of the spectacle. He was waiting for her outside, near the service entrance, a silent promise passing between them before she had returned to her duties as the evening's host. The bidding finally slowed, the auctioneer's voice echoing through the conservatory. Going once, going twice. And then, just before the gavel fell, a clear, calm voice from the back of the room cut through the air. $500,000! A collective gasp went through the crowd. All heads turned to see Alara, her hand raised, her expression calm and unreadable. The auctioneer, stunned but professional, recovered quickly. Sold, he cried, the gavel cracking down with a sharp finality. To our gracious host, Ms. Alara Thorne. Later, as the last of the guests departed, leaving behind the scent of wilting flowers and leftover champagne, Alara found Liam waiting for her, just as he had promised. He was leaning against the side of his rented truck, his arms crossed, his face cast in the shadows of the dimly lit service alley. She walked toward him, the silk of her gown whispering against the concrete. He had seen what she did. He had been watching from a crack in a service door. You didn't have to do that, he said, his voice a low rumble. Buy the bench. You could have just taken it. It was never mine to take, she said, stopping in front of him. It was a donation, and the foundation needed the money. Her foundation, his bench. The money had simply moved from one of her pockets to another, but the gesture was the point. It was an act of respect, for him, for his work, for the boundary he had drawn between them. It was her way of saying, I understand. Besides, she added, a small, shy smile touching her lips, I couldn't risk someone else owning it. It belongs at the cabin. Liam's gaze softened. He looked down at her, at the diamond butterfly on her shoulder, at the weariness that still clung to her despite her victory. You look tired, he said. I am, she admitted. I'm tired of all of this. She gestured vaguely to the glittering building behind them, to the city, to the life she had been living. What do you want, Alara? He asked, his voice quiet but intense. It was the question no one ever asked her. They asked what the company needed, what the market wanted, what the shareholders demanded. No one ever just asked her. She looked up at him, her heart in her throat. I want to go home, she whispered. He didn't ask her to clarify which home she meant. He already knew. He simply nodded, a slow, understanding gesture that said everything. He reached out, and for the first time took her hand. His was warm and calloused, hers was cool and smooth. The contrast was perfect. All right, he said. Let's go home. The drive back to Cedar Valley was a journey through worlds. They left the city's relentless glow behind, the towering buildings shrinking in the rearview mirror, replaced by the dark, sleeping silhouettes of suburbs, then towns, then finally, the open, star-dusted expanse of the high country. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. The silence in the cab of the truck was comfortable, easy, filled with the quiet hum of the engine and the weight of a decision that had finally been made. Alara had her own driver and her own luxury SUV waiting for her, but she had sent them away. She had wanted to ride with him. She had wanted to leave her old life behind in the most literal way possible. She sat in the passenger seat, her elegant silk gown now wrinkled, her hair starting to escape its perfect chignon. She had never felt more at peace. She watched Liam as he drove, his hands steady on the wheel, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. He was so solid, so real. He was like the mountains that were now beginning to loom in the darkness around them, quiet, strong, and unchangeable. She thought about the life she was leaving. The endless meetings, the pressure, the soul-crushing loneliness of being at the top. She had thought it was what she wanted, what she was supposed to want. She had built an empire, but she had forgotten to build a life. Liam had a life. It wasn't a life of wealth or power, but it was rich in ways she was only just beginning to understand. It was rich in love, in connection, in the simple, profound beauty of a shared meal and a quiet evening by the fire. It was the life she had glimpsed through the window of his cabin, the life she had been so afraid of, and the life she now knew she couldn't live without. As they pulled onto the familiar, unpaved road leading to his cabin, the first light of dawn was beginning to streak the eastern sky, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of pale pink and gold. The world was waking up, and so was she. When they pulled up to the cabin, a light was already on inside. Maya, who must have heard the truck, came running out onto the porch, her face a sleepy, joyous mess. "You came back," she cried, her voice full of a child's unwavering faith. Ilara got out of the truck and knelt, just as she had before, and swept Maya into her arms. But this time, it wasn't a hug of desperate relief, it was a hug of joyful arrival. It was a hug that said, "I'm here, I'm home." Liam stood by, watching them, a slow, easy smile on his face. He had taken a risk, a monumental leap of faith, and it had led him right back here, to the heart of his world. But his world was different now. It was bigger, it was brighter. It was filled with a hope he had long since given up on. He walked over to Ilara, who was still holding Maya, and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. She looked up at him, her eyes shining in the early morning light. There were a million things to figure out, 1,000 details to navigate. Her old life wouldn't just disappear. But in that moment, none of it mattered. They were together. They were home. And for the first time, the future felt not like a path to be endured, but like a trail waiting to be explored, together. The integration of their two worlds was a slow, deliberate process, a dance of compromise and discovery. Ilara didn't just move into Liam's life, she became a part of its fabric. Her first official act was not a corporate takeover, but the simple, profound task of helping Maya paint her bedroom. They spent a whole weekend on it, the air thick with the smell of paint and their shared laughter. Ilara, in old, paint-splattered jeans Liam had found for her, looked happier and more relaxed than he had ever seen her. She learned the simple rhythms of their life. The morning ritual of coffee on the porch, the quiet evenings spent reading by the fire, the joy of a perfect, golden-brown pancake. She discovered the simple pleasure of a walk in the woods with no destination, of listening to the wind in the pines, of feeling the solid earth beneath her feet. Her old life, however, did not simply vanish. It followed her, but on her terms. She stepped down as CEO of Thorne Dynamics, transitioning to a role as board chair, a position that allowed her to guide the company's vision without being consumed by its daily operations. She moved the headquarters of the Blue Butterfly Foundation to a small, unassuming office in the nearby town, running it with a lean, dedicated team. She used her immense resources not for personal gain, but to protect the wilderness she had come to love, funding conservation projects, endowing educational programs, and ensuring the long-term health of the park where Liam worked. Liam, in turn, found his own world expanding. He didn't quit his job as a ranger, it was a part of who he was. But with Ilara's support, he was able to take on new projects, to dream bigger. He designed and built a new nature center for the park, a beautiful, sustainable building made from reclaimed wood, a place where children like Maya could learn about the wild world around them. He taught workshops on woodworking, sharing his quiet artistry with others. He found that the strength and stillness he had always possessed were not limitations, but assets. Their home was the cabin. Ilara could have bought a mountain, could have built a palace of glass and stone, but she didn't want a palace. She wanted the cabin, with its worn-out furniture, its smoking chimney, and its walls filled with memories. They expanded it, of course, adding a new wing with a larger kitchen and a sun-drenched studio where Ilara could work and Maya could draw. But they did it carefully, using local materials and honoring the original spirit of the place. The bench Liam had built sat on the front porch, a constant reminder of their beginning, a symbol of the bridge they had built between their two worlds. It was where they drank their morning coffee, where they watched the sunset, where they sat together in the quiet evenings, their hands intertwined, watching the stars come out. Their life wasn't a fairy tale. It was real. It had its challenges, its moments of friction, its reminders of the different worlds they came from. But it was a life built on a foundation of mutual respect, of shared values, and of a deep, abiding love that had been forged in the snow, tested by doubt, and ultimately proven to be as strong and enduring as the mountains themselves. One crisp autumn evening, a year after the gala, the three of them were sitting on the porch, wrapped in blankets, watching the leaves fall. Maya was nestled between them, her head resting on Ilara's lap. "You know," Maya said, her voice sleepy, "you're not a sad queen anymore." Ilara smiled, her fingers gently stroking Maya's hair. "No," she said softly. "I'm not." Liam reached over and took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. He looked at her, at the woman who had walked out of a storm and into his life, and his heart was full. She was not a queen, she was not a billionaire. She was Ilara, and she was home.